Sometimes the truth doesn't knock politely. It rings your doorbell on a sunny Thursday afternoon and shatters everything you thought you knew about your life. I'm sitting here today because I need to tell you about the moment my entire world collapsed, and somehow, against all odds, how I built something better from the ruins. My name is Catherine Bennett, though everyone calls me Kathy. I'm 72 years old now, a retired nurse, and if you'd told me 7 years ago that I'd be sitting in this park with my little dog Bella, holding this old photograph and actually smiling about what happened, I would have said you were crazy. But here I am, and here's my story. I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts in the 1950s, the youngest of 4 daughters. My father worked at the textile mill, and my mother kept house. That's what women did back then. I watched her wait on my father hand and foot, watched her excuse his temper, his drinking, his absences. I swore I'd never be like that. I'd have a career. I'd marry a good man. I'd build a different kind of life. In 1976, I met George Andrew Bennett at a church social. I was 23, fresh out of nursing school, working the night shift at Massachusetts General Hospital. He was 25, charming, with dark hair and an easy smile. He worked as a truck driver, he said, making decent money hauling goods up and down the East Coast. He wasn't like the mill workers I'd grown up around. He had ambition, dreams of starting his own trucking company someday. We dated for 4 years. George was patient about that, said he respected that I wanted to focus on my career first. In 1980, we got married in a simple ceremony at the same church where we'd met. I wore my mother's wedding dress, altered to fit. George wore a rented suit. We honeymooned for 3 days in Cape Cod, all we could afford, and I remember thinking I was the luckiest woman alive. Our life together seemed normal, even good. We bought a small house in a Boston suburb in 1982. George was away a lot for work, sometimes a week at a time, sometimes 2, but that's what long-haul trucking meant. He'd call from payphones at truck stops, always with stories about bad weather delays or mechanical troubles. I worked 12-hour shifts at the hospital, came home exhausted to an empty house, and waited for him to come back. Our first son, Michael, was born in 1983. Thomas came along in 1986. George was a decent father when he was home. He'd toss the boys in the air, take them to Red Sox games, teach them to throw a baseball. But he was gone more than he was present. I told myself that's just how it was. My father had worked long hours too. This was what providing for a family looked like. The years blurred together in a routine of work, raising boys and waiting. I'd pack George's duffel bag with clean clothes and his favorite snacks. He'd kiss me goodbye, promise to call when he could, and disappear for days or weeks. Then he'd come home with road stories and paychecks that kept us afloat. Not comfortable. George always said the trucking industry was unpredictable, but we managed. There were moments I wondered, little things that didn't quite add up. Why didn't he ever want me to visit him on the road? Why did he always insist on separate bank accounts? Why were there gaps in his stories, details that changed? But I pushed those thoughts away. I was a nurse. I dealt in facts, in evidence. I had no proof of anything wrong, just vague unease that I told myself was paranoia. By 2015, we'd been married 35 years. Our boys were grown. Michael was a teacher. Thomas worked in IT. Both married, both with kids of their own. George was 62, talking about retirement. I was 67, already retired from the hospital after 40 years of nursing. I'd imagined we'd finally have time together, maybe travel, visit the grandkids more often. September 17th, 2015. That date is burned into my brain like a brand. I woke up that morning thinking about our anniversary dinner. 35 years. I'd made reservations at the Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date, bought a new dress. navy blue with small white flowers. I felt almost girlish, excited. George had left 3 days earlier for a run to Chicago. He'd be back by evening, he promised, in time for dinner. I spent the morning cleaning the house, arranging flowers I'd bought at the supermarket. I made his favorite dessert, apple pie with vanilla ice cream. Everything had to be perfect. At 3 o'clock, I was in the kitchen when the doorbell rang. Bella, my little terrier mix, started barking. I wiped my hands on my apron and went to the door, expecting maybe a delivery or a neighbor. The woman standing on my porch was nobody I recognized. She looked about 50, with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail and tired blue eyes that reminded me of patients I'd seen in the hospital. People carrying too much pain for too long. She wore jeans and a cardigan, and she was clutching a large purse against her chest like a shield. "Are you Catherine Bennett?" she asked. Her voice shook slightly. "Yes," I said, feeling that nurse's instinct kick in. Something was wrong with this woman. She looked like she might faint. "Can I help you?" "I'm Linda," she said. "Linda Bennett, George's wife." I actually laughed. It was such an absurd thing to say. "I think you have the wrong person," I told her. "I'm George Bennett's wife. We've been married 35 years. She didn't leave. Instead, she opened her purse with trembling hands and pulled out a piece of paper, a marriage certificate. I could see it from where I stood, the official seal, the signatures. George Andrew Bennett and Linda Marie Thompson. Married June 12, 1982, 2 years after our wedding. The world tilted. I grabbed the doorframe to steady myself. "That's not possible," I heard myself say, but my voice sounded far away. "That's not. George is a truck driver. He's on the road. He's not a truck driver," Linda said quietly. "He told me he works on oil rigs, offshore platforms. That's why he's gone for weeks at a time. My legs wouldn't hold me anymore." I sat down right there on the porch steps, and Linda sat beside me. 2 strangers, 2 wives, sitting on my porch while Bella sniffed curiously at this woman who'd just blown my life apart. Linda told me her story. She'd met George in 1981 at a hospital in Chicago where she worked as a nurse. He'd told her he was divorced, that he worked in the oil industry, traveled for work. They'd married in 1982. They had 3 daughters, Jessica, born in 1984, Amanda in 1987, Sarah in 1990. For 33 years, she'd believed George worked on oil platforms in the Gulf of Mexico. He'd be gone for a month, sometimes 6 weeks, then home for a week or 2. He'd come back with stories about life on the rig, about the other workers, about the dangerous conditions. She'd believed every word until the money stopped making sense. Oil work paid well, so where was the money? George always had excuses. The company was having financial troubles. There were pay disputes. He'd gotten into some bad investments. Linda had started to suspect he was gambling, maybe drinking. So 3 months ago, she'd hired a private investigator. The investigator had followed George, not to an oil rig, to Massachusetts, to our house, to me. We sat on that porch for 2 hours, comparing our lives. The similarities were eerie, almost cruel. We were both nurses. George apparently had a type. We both worked 12-hour shifts, which meant we were conveniently gone when he needed to be somewhere else. We both made his favorite foods. Linda made pot roast on Sundays. I made it on Wednesdays. We both believed his stories about unpredictable work schedules and bad cell phone reception. The logistics of his deception were staggering. 2 complete lives, 2 families, 2 sets of holidays, birthdays, anniversaries. He'd spend Thanksgiving with my family 1 year, Christmas with Linda's, then reverse it the next year, always with perfect excuses about work obligations. He had different phone numbers, a Massachusetts number for me, an Illinois number for Linda, different email addresses. He'd even had different circles of friends who never overlapped. For 30 years, he'd been running between two lives like an actor in two different plays, never missing a cue, never breaking character. Linda showed me photos on her phone. George with 3 girls I'd never seen. George at graduations I'd never attended. George holding grandchildren I didn't know existed. It was like looking at someone else's life, except the man in every photo was my husband. "What do we do?" Linda asked. Her mascara had run, leaving dark streaks down her face. I probably looked the same. "We wait," I said, because George was supposed to come home that night, and now, for the first time in 35 years, I'd be waiting with the truth. Linda called the hotel where she was staying and canceled her room. She wasn't leaving. We went inside. I made coffee with shaking hands, and we sat at my kitchen table, that table where I'd fed my boys breakfast for years, where George and I had paid bills and planned vacations and lived what I'd thought was a real marriage. We talked until our voices were hoarse. We found more connections, more echoes between our lives. George had proposed to Linda in a restaurant, the same restaurant where he'd proposed to me, apparently his go-to romantic spot. He'd told us both the same stories about his childhood, his dreams, his fears, the same jokes, the same expressions of love. At 7 o'clock, we heard his truck in the driveway. Linda and I looked at each other. I felt strangely calm, that same calm I'd feel in the ER when a critical patient came in. Training took over. You assessed the situation. You dealt with what was in front of you. George came through the door with flowers, pink roses, my favorite, and a wrapped gift. He was smiling, calling out, "Kathy, I made it. Happy anniversary, sweetheart." Then he saw Linda. I watched his face go through a series of changes, confusion, recognition, fear, and then, shockingly, anger. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, looking at Linda. Not apologetic, not ashamed, angry, like she'd violated some rule of the game. "What am I doing here?" Linda's voice rose. "What are you doing here? You said you were on the rig." "George," I said quietly, and he turned to look at me. "Sit down." "Kathy, I can explain." "Sit down." He sat. The flowers dropped onto the table, petals scattering across the wood. For the next 3 hours, we interrogated him. Not like wives, like investigators. Linda had brought documents. I pulled out old tax returns, bank statements I'd been too trusting to examine closely before. The financial picture that emerged was damning. He'd been stealing from both of us, moving money between accounts, using our trust to fund his double life. He'd maxed out credit cards in my name. He'd taken out a second mortgage on Linda's house without her knowledge. He had gambling debts, business ventures that had failed, loans from people we'd never heard of. The trucking job was real. He had worked as a driver years ago, but lately he'd been doing odd jobs, hustling, barely keeping ahead of the collapse. "Why?" I finally asked. Not yelling anymore, just genuinely trying to understand. "Why did you do this?" He looked at me with those eyes I'd loved for 35 years, and he said, "Because I could." That's what broke something in me. Not because I could find love in 2 places, not because I made mistakes, because I could, because we'd trusted him, and that made us easy marks. "You need to leave," I said. "Kathy, get out!" I was screaming now, and so was Linda. "Get out of my house. Get out of our lives." He stood up, grabbed his keys. At the door, he turned back. "You two are crazy," he said. "You've ruined everything, everything I built." "We ruined it?" Linda threw her coffee cup. It shattered against the wall beside his head. "Get out!" He left. The door slammed, and Linda and I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the debris of our shared destruction, and we didn't cry. We were too shocked for tears. The next months were a blur of lawyers and therapists and sleepless nights. I filed for divorce. So did Linda. We coordinated our legal strategies, shared the private investigator's evidence. George declared bankruptcy. Turns out he had almost nothing left anyway, and disappeared. Last I heard, he was somewhere in Florida, working at a marina, living in someone's garage. My sons were devastated. Michael wouldn't speak to me for months. "How could you not know?" he kept asking. "How could you be so blind?" Like it was my fault, like I'd been complicit in my own deception. Thomas was angrier at George, but the damage was done. Their father had lied to them too. Every memory was contaminated now. Every childhood moment was suspect. Linda's daughters had similar reactions. We were all grieving, all trying to figure out what was real and what had been performance. I spiraled. I'd wake up at 3 a.m, convinced I could hear George's truck in the driveway. I'd go through old photos, searching for clues I'd missed. I saw a therapist who specialized in betrayal trauma. Yes, that's a real thing, and yes, I qualified. I lost weight. I stopped calling friends because I couldn't bear their pity or their judgment. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was doubting everything I thought I knew about myself. I'd been a nurse for 40 years. I'd diagnosed conditions, spotted inconsistencies, saved lives. How had I missed this? Was I stupid? Willfully blind? Had I known somewhere deep down and just refused to see? About 4 months after everything fell apart, my phone rang. Linda. "Kathy?" Her voice was hesitant. "This is going to sound crazy, but would you want to get coffee sometime?" I almost said no. Seeing her meant seeing the whole mess again, but something stopped me. Maybe loneliness, maybe curiosity. We met at a Starbucks halfway between our houses. Awkward at first, both of us clutching our cups like life rafts. Then Linda said, "I keep thinking about that pot roast recipe," and I said, "The one with the carrots and potatoes?" And we both started laughing. Hysterical, painful laughter. We started meeting weekly. Thursday afternoons became our time. We'd swap George stories, not the painful ones, but the absurd ones. The time he told both of us he was allergic to shellfish, he wasn't. The way he'd used the same pickup lines. The identical Christmas presents he'd given us in different years. We discovered we had more in common than just George. We both loved gardening. Linda grew tomatoes. I grew roses. We both read mystery novels. We'd both dreamed of traveling to Ireland someday. In another life, another context, we might have been friends anyway. Then Linda suggested something radical. "My girls should meet your boys. They're half-siblings. They should know each other." The first meeting was at a neutral restaurant. 5 adult children, 2 ex-wives, an ocean of resentment and confusion. Michael sat stiff and silent. Jessica cried, but Thomas and Amanda started talking, found out they both worked in tech, and by the end of the night, they'd exchanged numbers. Slowly, impossibly, a new kind of family emerged, not the one any of us had planned for, not traditional or neat or easy to explain, but real. Linda and I helped each other through the divorce proceedings. We celebrated when the papers were final, actually opened a bottle of champagne and toasted to freedom. Our kids started getting together for holidays. The grandchildren, 8 between us, played together, oblivious to the complicated history. Last Christmas, we all gathered at Linda's house. 15 people around a table that was too small, passing dishes, laughing, arguing about politics and sports. George's name didn't come up once. He'd become irrelevant to the family we'd built. I'm 72 now, and I'm single. Probably will be for the rest of my life. I don't trust easily anymore. and I'm okay with that. But I'm not lonely. Linda and I talk almost every day. We take our grandkids to museums, to parks, to movies. We go on cruises together. We finally made it to Ireland last year, walked the cliffs of Moher in the rain, laughed at how cliché we were. People ask me how I forgave George. I tell them I haven't, and I probably won't. Forgiveness isn't always necessary for healing. What I've done is accept what happened and decide it doesn't define me. George's choices were his own. My blindness to them doesn't make me stupid. It makes me human. I loved honestly. He lied deliberately. Those aren't equivalent failures. What I've learned is that trust isn't foolish, even when it's betrayed. The alternative, living in constant suspicion, questioning every word, doubting every gesture, that's not living at all. I chose to trust, and yes, I was hurt. But I also chose to love my sons, to build a career helping people, to create a life that had meaning. George's betrayal doesn't erase any of that. I've also learned that families don't have to look traditional to be real. Linda and I joke that we're sister wives, except without the husband. Our kids call us the moms collectively. Our grandchildren think it's normal to have two grandmas who aren't related but do everything together. Maybe that's the best revenge, taking what George tried to destroy and making something better. The hardest lesson was about identity. For so long, I defined myself through relationships: daughter, wife, mother, nurse. When the wife part disintegrated, I had to figure out who Kathy was on her own. I'm still learning. I take pottery classes now. I volunteer at a domestic violence shelter, helping other women navigate the aftermath of betrayal. I've even started dating, nothing serious, just coffee dates and movies with a few nice men who make me laugh. Sometimes I still get angry. I'll be doing something ordinary, folding laundry, walking Bella, and I'll remember something George said or did, and rage will wash over me. 30 years of my life stolen. That anger is valid, and I don't try to push it away anymore. I feel it, acknowledge it, and let it pass. But mostly, I feel grateful. Not for what happened. I'll never be grateful for that betrayal. But for what came after, for Linda's friendship, which is one of the most honest relationships I've ever had, for my sons, who eventually forgave my blindness and rebuilt their relationships with me, for the unexpected family we've created from the wreckage. Last week, Linda and I took all 8 grandkids to the zoo. We were watching the penguins when a woman approached us, smiling. "Are you 2 sisters?" she asked. Linda and I looked at each other. "Something like that," I said. The woman nodded at our grandchildren, running wild around the penguin exhibit. "You're lucky to have each other. Family is everything." "Yes," Linda said, squeezing my hand. "It really is." That night, sitting on my porch with Bella curled up beside me, I thought about that woman's comment. Family is everything, not the family George created through deception, but the family Linda and I built through honesty. Not the marriage I thought I had, but the friendship I never expected. If I could go back and tell my 23-year-old self anything, standing in that church basement in 1976, meeting charming George Bennett for the first time, what would I say? Would I warn her, tell her to run? I don't think so, because that would mean missing out on Michael and Thomas, missing out on my career, my grandchildren, my life, even missing out on this strange, beautiful friendship with Linda that emerged from the ashes. What I'd tell her instead is this: trust yourself. When something feels wrong, investigate. Don't silence your instincts to keep the peace, and know that even if you're betrayed, even if everything falls apart, you're strong enough to rebuild. Because here's what George never understood, what he still doesn't understand. He didn't destroy us. He tried. He lied and manipulated and stole years of our lives. But Linda and I survived. More than survived. We created something he never could, something honest, something real. That's my story, not a cautionary tale, though there are certainly warnings in it. Not a tragedy, though it has tragic elements. It's a story about resilience, about finding friendship in the wreckage, about building a family from broken pieces. I'm 72 years old, and I'm sitting in this park on a beautiful October afternoon. My little dog is beside me. My phone will probably ring soon. Linda checking in, or one of my sons, or maybe one of the grandkids asking if Grandma Kathy can babysit. In an hour, I have a pottery class. Tomorrow, Linda and I are driving to visit Michael and his family. Next month, we're taking the grandkids to Disney World, all of us together, one big impossible family. George is somewhere in Florida alone. Linda and I are here, surrounded by the people we love and who love us back, honestly. I know which life I'd choose. The truth matters, love matters. But what matters most is what you do after the truth shatters everything you thought you knew. You can stay in the ruins or you can start building something new. Linda and I chose to build, and what we've built, flawed and unconventional and absolutely real, that's worth more than 30 years of perfect lies. That's the lesson I want to pass down to my grandchildren, to anyone listening. You are not defined by what's done to you. You're defined by what you do next. And sometimes the most beautiful things grow in the most unlikely places, even on the porch where two women sat together on the worst day of their lives and decided not to let it be the end, especially there.